When I saw him standing at the edge of the living room, holding my phone in both hands, I knew something had shifted. My husband never touched my phone. Not out of respect or trust, but because it simply never interested him. But now, his fingers hovered over the screen, his brows pulled together in a way I hadn't seen in years. My breath caught, not from fear of being caught, not exactly. But because I remembered. I remembered the message. That one single message I'd meant to delete but didn't. I stepped forward too fast, too desperate, and the floor creaked beneath me. He looked up. His eyes met mine. 1,000 silent questions swirled there, and I didn't have the courage to answer a single one. I reached out, muttered something, I don't even recall what. But he pulled the phone away from my grasp, locked his gaze back on the screen, and began scrolling. Slowly. Methodically. His face changed with every line he read. The color drained. His lips pressed thin. My chest tightened as I counted the seconds. I remembered exactly which message came next. The one that didn't leave room for interpretation. The one that could ruin everything. His finger paused, and I saw it. I saw him reach it. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. Then, suddenly, the screen lit up with a new notification. A name. A name that didn't belong in his world. His head tilted, just slightly. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. I tasted blood, I'd bitten the inside of my cheek again. My nerves tangled with something darker, the dread of watching a life unravel in real time. 3 months ago, I made a choice. A mistake, maybe. One that changed everything. But if you'll let me, I want to tell you how it really happened. Before you judge me. Before you think you know. Let me take you back to the moment it all began. But first, tell me where you're watching this from, and have you ever kept a secret that refused to stay buried, no matter how hard you tried? The morning sun spilled through the blinds, drawing thin lines across the floor as I stood in the kitchen, staring at the coffee pot without really seeing it. The house was quiet. My husband had already left for work, his footsteps having long faded into routine. That was the thing about our life, it ran like clockwork. Predictable. Precise. And utterly suffocating. I used to love the silence. Now, it felt like a blanket I couldn't breathe under. The toast popped up behind me. I didn't move. My mind was still stuck on the night before, when I had stood in front of the mirror, unclipping my hair with a kind of absent-minded sorrow. I had looked at myself for a long time, too long, trying to find the woman I used to be. The one who once laughed with abandon, who used to feel something when her husband touched her back. That woman had faded quietly. Not all at once, but slowly. Over years of small dismissals, of absent dinners, of birthday cards with nothing but a signature. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't mean. He was indifferent. And that, somehow, hurt worse. I had signed up for yoga 2 weeks ago. It wasn't about fitness or mindfulness, not really. It was about finding a place to exist where no one expected anything from me. Where I didn't have to be someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's perfectly ironed version of a woman. The first 2 sessions had been uneventful. A few women my age, a handful younger. The instructor was calm, gentle-voiced, the room always smelled like lavender and sandalwood. It was a quiet kind of escape. And then, on the 3rd session, I saw him. I was rolling out my mat when he walked in, dressed in a simple gray shirt and navy joggers. His presence shifted the air, subtly but unmistakably. I recognized him before I fully registered it. He had been in our house countless times over the years. My son's best friend. A man I remembered as younger, less steady. But now, he carried himself differently. Confident. Relaxed. Like someone who knew exactly who he was. Our eyes met as he passed by. Just a glance. Nothing more. Still, my fingers trembled slightly as I adjusted the corner of my mat. I tried to tell myself it was surprise. That was all. I hadn't expected to see someone from that world here. My home world. My son's world. My husband's world. After the session, as I reached for my water bottle, I felt a presence beside me. He smiled. "I didn't think I'd see a familiar face here," he said, tone light. "Neither did I," I replied. My voice sounded strange to me. Softer. He asked how I'd been. We exchanged pleasantries. It should have ended there. But it didn't. He walked with me to the parking lot. Nothing inappropriate was said. But something had shifted. A thread had been tugged. One I didn't know was loose. I spent the rest of the day pretending nothing had happened. I folded laundry. I replied to emails. I sat across from my husband at dinner, nodding while he spoke about office politics. But I wasn't there. Not really. That night, I opened my closet and stared at my clothes. So many soft pastels. So much beige. When had I stopped choosing for myself? I reached for a blouse I hadn't worn in years. Red. Fitted. Not something you wear for yoga. But I laid it out anyway. Just to see how it felt. The next morning, I was early to class. He arrived a few minutes after me, and this time, he sat beside me. Again, nothing was said. But our mats touched at the corners. That simple contact felt louder than any conversation. I told myself it was harmless. That I was imagining things. But I knew better. That evening, my son called. He talked about his work, his girlfriend, plans for a trip. He mentioned that his friend had taken up yoga, something about stress relief. I nodded through the phone, the cord coiling around my fingers like guilt. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay beside my husband, who breathed steadily, turned toward the wall. I watched the ceiling shift in the shadows, trying to figure out what was happening to me. It wasn't love. Not yet. It wasn't even desire. Not quite. It was something else. A flicker. A door, slightly ajar. A part of me wanted to slam it shut. But another part, one I thought had died years ago, was already reaching for the handle. I didn't intend to go. That morning, I told myself it would be irresponsible. Foolish. Dangerous, even. I had errands to run, a house to clean, meals to plan. I had no business stepping into the same yoga studio where he might be again. I wasn't a teenager chasing a thrill. I was a grown woman, someone's wife, someone's mother. And yet, by the time noon rolled around, I was already dressed. Different clothes than usual. A black fitted top. Tighter leggings. Hair brushed and loosely tied with a clip I hadn't used in years. I noticed the change as I passed the hallway mirror, and I paused longer than necessary, wondering what I thought I was doing. He was already there when I arrived. Stretching quietly in the corner, focused, composed. He didn't look up immediately, and I told myself that was for the best. But when he finally glanced in my direction, our eyes met. Not briefly. Not casually. There was a pause, subtle and quiet, but unmistakable. The kind that carries too much weight for words. I pretended not to notice. I rolled out my mat, unzipped my bag, adjusted the corner just to buy time. But every cell in my body was suddenly alert, like my skin had remembered how to feel. The instructor dimmed the lights. Soft music played from the speakers, something instrumental, calming, rhythmic. We moved through poses slowly. I tried to concentrate, to breathe deeply, to stay present. But my body betrayed me. Every time I shifted, I felt his presence next to me. Not too close. Not touching. But aware. At one point, our hands brushed as we reached for our water bottles. Just a graze. But it lingered. After class, the group lingered outside the studio. A few people chatted about lunch spots, weekend plans. I didn't plan to stay. I gathered my mat and headed toward the exit, heart thudding in my chest like I'd run a mile. And then I heard him. "You're rushing," he said, lightly. No pressure. Just a statement. I turned, slowly, trying to find my composure. "I have things to do." "Of course," he nodded. "We all do." There was a pause. The kind that begs to be filled but doesn't need to be. "I was going to grab a coffee," he added. Nothing serious. I should have said no. I should have smiled politely, made an excuse, walked away. But I didn't. We ended up at a small cafe 2 blocks down. One I hadn't been to in years. It had old brick walls, wooden tables, and the kind of worn chairs that made you feel like the place had stories to tell. We sat in the corner, out of habit or instinct, I wasn't sure which. The conversation was easy. Too easy. We talked about the studio, about breathing techniques, about flexibility and aging joints. But underneath it all was something else. A current. A pull. He asked me how long I'd been practicing. I told him just a few weeks. He nodded, said he started recently too, something about needing calm, needing a pause from the chaos of his world. I asked him about his work, his travels. He asked me about my life. My days. And when I hesitated, he leaned forward slightly and said, "I'm not trying to pry. I'm curious." I wanted to laugh. Not at him. At myself. At how absurd it was to feel the seen by someone who had once played video games in my basement. But I didn't laugh. I answered. Quietly. Honestly. I told him that my days were quiet. Predictable. That sometimes I felt invisible in my own house. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer advice. He just listened. The cafe grew louder around us, but our table stayed in its own pocket of calm. And then, just before we stood to leave, it happened. We were walking toward the door. The afternoon light had turned golden. I turned to say goodbye, and he stepped just a little too close. Not inappropriately. Not forcefully. But close enough. "We don't have to pretend," he said, softly. "Not here." And then we kissed. Just like that. No build-up. No dramatic music. Just a quiet moment that shifted the earth under my feet. It didn't last long. I pulled away first. Not out of anger. But because I didn't know who I was in that second. "I should go," I said. He nodded, but didn't argue. Of course. The walk to my car felt longer than usual. My fingers shook slightly as I turned the key in the ignition. I sat there for a full minute, breathing. Thinking. When I got home, the house was still. The sunlight fell differently through the windows, or maybe I just saw it differently. I washed my hands slowly at the kitchen sink, watching the soap bubble and swirl. Dinner that night was quiet. My husband came home late, muttered something about traffic. I nodded, stirred the pot, set the table. He didn't notice anything different. Or if he did, he didn't say. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling again, but this time, my thoughts didn't spiral. They were focused. Sharpened. Clearer than I expected. Something had shifted. Not just between him and me, but inside me. I wasn't planning anything. I wasn't chasing an affair or a secret life. But I couldn't unfeel what I'd felt. Couldn't unknow what had awakened. Couldn't unsee the way he looked at me like I was still someone worth watching. And maybe that was the problem. Or maybe it was the beginning of the truth. The day after the kiss felt suspended in some strange limbo, one where time still moved forward, but my thoughts circled the same moment again and again. The softness of it. The audacity of it. The warmth of his hand near my waist. The absence of any immediate regret, and the weight of the guilt that came hours later. I moved through the house like a shadow of myself. Dishes were done, laundry folded, beds made. All the routine pieces fell into place, but my mind wandered off track, constantly dragging me back to the sidewalk outside the cafe. I kept checking my phone, then quickly putting it down as if it burned to touch it. No message came. I didn't know if I wanted one or feared it. My husband came home early that evening. Said he'd wrapped things up faster than expected. I flinched when I heard the door open. It felt like I was hiding something already, even though technically I wasn't. There was no affair. Not yet. Just a kiss. One kiss. But even as I repeated that to myself, I knew how weak the distinction sounded. He poured himself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter as I stirred the pasta sauce. We made small talk. Weather. Traffic. Groceries. I smiled and nodded, laughed at the right places. But I was floating just outside the moment, always slightly delayed, like a live broadcast with a broken signal. Then he mentioned it, casually, in passing, like it was nothing. I was thinking we should have a dinner next weekend, he said. Invite the boy over. And maybe his friend, too. Haven't seen him in a while. I nearly dropped the wooden spoon. My hands gripped the edge of the stove harder than necessary, and I kept my eyes on the pot. I managed, forcing my voice into something that resembled curiosity. You know, he continued. He's practically family. Been around since they were kids. It'd be nice. You used to enjoy having everyone together. I nodded slowly, hoping the steam from the sauce masked the flush rising up my neck. Yes, I said, my throat dry. That could be nice. But it wasn't nice. The thought of him sitting across from my husband, under our roof, sharing a meal while pretending everything was perfectly ordinary, it sent a cold shock through my spine. I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready for the reality of faces, of eye contact, of half-meant jokes and layered silences. I wasn't even sure what we were yet. Just two people who kissed? Or two people already orbiting something far more dangerous? That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to my husband's steady breathing beside me, counting the seconds between each exhale. I wondered if he could sense it, that something in me had shifted. I wondered if I could hide it long enough to figure out what to do. The next morning, I stayed home. No yoga. No errands. Just me and the walls, echoing with thoughts I couldn't seem to quiet. Around noon, I caved and opened my phone. Still no messages. Still nothing. I typed something out twice, deleted it both times. Then finally, I sent a short message. Are you all right? 3 dots appeared almost instantly, like he'd been waiting. But then they vanished. Came back. Vanished again. Then finally, yes. And you? I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Trying to understand what that was. His answer came faster than I expected. It was a moment. One I don't regret. But I understand if you do. That was the problem. I didn't regret it either. Not in the way I was supposed to. I didn't respond after that. I couldn't. It felt too loaded. Too fragile. Instead, I spent the day cleaning the house obsessively, scrubbing baseboards, organizing drawers, wiping windowsills. My muscles ached, but I kept moving. It was easier to focus on physical mess than the one building inside me. A few days passed. We didn't message again. At yoga, he wasn't there. Or maybe he came at another time. I kept going, telling myself it was still about self-care. But I knew better. I scanned the room every time I walked in, hoping and dreading all at once. Then, just as I began to settle into the idea that it had passed, that it had all been one intense mistake soon to be buried beneath routine, I received his message. Would you meet me for a walk? Just that. It was simple. No pressure. No flirtation. Just an offer. I stared at it for a long time. My finger hovered over the screen. I told myself I could decline. I had every right to. But my heart, it didn't want to. I said yes. We met at the park. A wide-open space, safe, public. Families with strollers, joggers, teenagers kicking a soccer ball in the distance. Nothing secret. Nothing wrong. We walked in silence at first. Then he spoke. I'm not trying to ruin anything. I hope you know that. I don't know what I know, I replied. I just know it's been a long time since I felt, noticed. He nodded, hands in his pockets, eyes ahead. That's not nothing. It struck me how gently he moved through the world. Like someone who had learned to be careful with other people's pain. We walked a little more. Talked about unimportant things. Movies. Books. Nothing to do with us. And that made it feel strangely more intimate. As the sky began to shift toward evening, we paused at a bench. I didn't sit. I just stood there, heart rattling in my chest like something alive and trapped. I don't know what you want from me, I said. It wasn't accusatory. Just honest. I don't know either, he answered. But I know what I feel when I'm around you. And I haven't felt that in a very long time. I looked away. Not because I was embarrassed. But because I wasn't ready to admit that I felt it too. We parted without another kiss. No touch. Just a long, quiet look that said more than words could. That night, I cooked dinner like always. Sat across from my husband like always. Smiled, nodded, cleaned the plates like always. But inside me, the question kept echoing, what was I doing? And what would I do next? Because something had started. Quietly. Undeniably. And I had no idea how to stop it. I tried to convince myself that walking with him in the park meant nothing. That it was innocent, normal, human. That two people who shared a history, however peripheral, could talk without consequence. But deep down, I knew better. There was something dangerous in the ease between us. Something that blurred the lines I had spent decades carefully drawing. For the next few days, I went back to routine with surgical precision. I cooked elaborate meals I had no appetite for. I reorganized the pantry, the linen closet, even my jewelry drawer, just to keep my hands busy, my mind anchored. I didn't go to yoga. I didn't text. I didn't respond to the polite check-in message he sent 2 days later. And yet, I thought of him constantly. I found myself rehearsing conversations we hadn't had, rewinding our walk in the park, wondering how close I'd come to the edge of something I might not be able to step back from. There were moments I felt almost angry, at myself, at him, at the universe for making it all feel so simple when it shouldn't have been. But more than anything, I felt exposed. Like I'd opened a door I couldn't close without losing something I hadn't even fully claimed. Then, on a quiet Wednesday morning, my husband came into the kitchen holding his phone. "Talked to our son last night," he said casually, pouring coffee. "He might come visit this weekend. Said he wants to bring his friend along too. Thought it'd be nice to catch up." My body tensed, though I tried to hide it. The spoon in my hand stilled mid-stir. My stomach felt tight, like it was bracing for impact. "Oh," I said, too flatly. I cleared my throat and tried again. That's great." "Yeah," he nodded, sipping. "It's been a while. We should do a proper dinner. I'll grab some wine later today." He was in a good mood. He looked almost excited, a rare flicker of enthusiasm lighting up his usually steady expression. I didn't want to take that away from him. I didn't want to ruin anything. But inside me, a slow panic was building. He was coming. To my house. To sit at my table. With my husband. With my son. All I could see was the way he'd looked at me in the park. The way he'd said nothing and everything with just one glance. I imagined trying to look him in the eye across a table with my husband to my left and my son to my right. I imagined the weight of that silence, the danger of it. But I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The next day, I went back to yoga. Not because I needed the class, but because I needed clarity. I needed to see him, to understand what he wanted from me, or what I wanted from him. He was already there when I arrived. Not stretching, not talking. Just sitting on his mat, legs crossed, eyes closed. When I laid down my mat beside him, he opened his eyes and gave me a small nod. Nothing more. No words. We moved through the session with quiet focus. I kept my breathing measured, my hands still, my movements precise. But my thoughts were anything but calm. After class, he waited by the lockers. Not close enough to make it obvious, but close enough that I knew he was waiting for me specifically. I hesitated. Then walked over, slowly, heart hammering beneath my calm exterior. "Saturday," I said. "He told me you're coming." He looked at me, unreadable for a second, then nodded. I wasn't sure if I should. "Will it be strange?" He shrugged lightly. "Only if we let it be." I looked down at my shoes, unsure what I was even asking for. "I didn't plan for any of this," I whispered. "Neither did I," he said. "But here we are." There was a pause. Heavy. Quiet. "You don't have to worry," he added, voice low. "I won't say or do anything. It'll be a normal evening." Nothing about this is normal. I know. We didn't hug. We didn't touch. We didn't even exchange goodbyes. But something passed between us as I turned to leave. Something silent and dangerous and fragile. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I sat in the living room long after my husband went to bed, staring at the empty space where the lamp cast shadows on the wall. I wondered how I had gotten here, how one unexpected meeting had rippled into everything else. I wasn't someone who chased trouble. I had spent most of my life avoiding it. And yet, I felt like I was already deep in the middle of something I didn't fully understand. The days moved quickly after that. I went through the motions. Grocery shopping, cleaning, preparing for guests. My husband was cheerful, full of plans. I smiled and nodded, pretended to be part of it. But inside, I was unraveling. On Saturday, I stood in front of the mirror in the upstairs bathroom, trying to decide what to wear. Everything looked wrong. Too casual. Too formal. Too revealing. Too bland. Eventually, I settled on something neutral, a soft gray blouse, dark jeans, simple earrings. Nothing to draw attention. Nothing that would say too much. But when I looked at myself, I saw someone trying too hard not to be noticed. The doorbell rang precisely at 6. My son's voice echoed through the hall, bright and familiar. I forced a smile onto my face as I descended the stairs. They were both standing in the entryway. My son looked the same, always slightly rushed, smiling with half his mouth, his jacket half off his shoulders. But my eyes immediately found the other. He looked up, and for a split second everything stilled. Then he smiled politely, nodded. "Good to see you." I nodded back. "You too." Dinner was normal. That was the strange part. We sat around the table, laughed, told stories. My husband talked about a new client. My son teased me about how I always overcooked the vegetables. The man sitting across from me never said anything out of line. Never looked at me too long. Never slipped. But I felt it. Underneath. That undercurrent. That unspoken thing neither of us dared to name. I passed him the bread. He thanked me without looking. I asked if he wanted more wine. He shook his head. It was like trying to dance on a tightrope with the entire world watching. Later, as they moved into the living room with drinks, I lingered in the kitchen, pretending to clean up just for a moment of air. He came in quietly, returned his glass to the counter, then paused. We didn't speak. Just stood there, inches apart. His shoulder brushed mine as he passed. That was it. But it was enough. Enough to know this wasn't over. Enough to know it was only beginning. The dinner ended sooner than I expected. Everyone had eaten their fill, and my son was the first to stand, stretching and yawning, his energy always overflowing. My husband, too, seemed content with the evening, chatting with our son in the living room while I quietly cleared the table. I tried to smile, to act like everything was exactly as it should be, but it felt like my thoughts were a whirlwind I couldn't stop. I had told myself, for days now, that the encounter would fade. That one dinner, one kiss, one walk in the park wouldn't be enough to unravel everything. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I couldn't unsee him anymore. Every time I glanced at my husband, I thought of him. Every time I turned to my son, I thought of him. Every moment of ordinary life felt strange and out of place, like a mask hiding something that had already changed. I walked back to the kitchen with a plate in hand, making sure to place it into the dishwasher with deliberate care, trying to stay calm, to keep my hands from shaking. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made me freeze for just a moment, and before I could turn, he appeared in the doorway. He was just standing there, a little unsure, as if trying to gauge if it was all right to step into the space we had just shared. I almost didn't know what to say. The awkwardness of the moment hung between us, an invisible thread pulling tighter with each passing second. "Can I help with anything?" he asked, his voice soft, as though he were trying to make himself small, polite. I wondered, for a moment, if he could feel the tension in the room, or if it was only me who was suffocating beneath it. I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw not just the man who had once been a boy in my house, but someone who was also now a stranger, someone who had become something more than I'd expected. He had been so careful all evening. So controlled. But this moment, this small question, felt like it had cracked open something I wasn't sure I could close. "No," I said quietly, shaking my head as I wiped my hands on a towel, trying to act normal. "It's fine. I've got it." The words didn't feel right. They weren't enough to cover the undercurrent between us. But what else was there to say? There was a pause before he nodded, stepping back slowly. He lingered just outside the kitchen, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His eyes stayed on me for a few seconds, and I felt the weight of it like a tangible thing pressing against me. "I should go," he said finally. "I know you probably want some space after all this." His words were light, but there was something deeper in them, something heavier. And I knew it wasn't just the evening that was pressing on him, it was me. Us. "Okay," I replied, my voice thin, just above a whisper. I didn't trust myself to say more. Didn't trust the emotions swirling in me, threatening to spill over. "Thanks for coming. It was good to see you." I knew it wasn't good. Not really. Not at all. He gave me one last look, one that seemed to say more than 1,000 words ever could, and then he left. The door clicked shut behind him with a soft finality that left my chest hollow. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where he had been. The house felt quieter now, even though my son was still talking in the other room. I could hear the sound of his voice, the soft laughter. But none of it reached me. I was stuck in that moment, that strange silence that hung between me and the man who had just walked out of my house, leaving me with nothing but a memory of something that couldn't exist. When I finally went to bed, my husband was already asleep. His breathing was deep, rhythmic. I didn't want to disturb him, didn't want to tell him how restless I was, how everything in me felt unsettled. I lay there in the dark, watching the faint outline of the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling in endless loops. The kiss. The walk. The silence between us after dinner. His eyes, so full of something unspoken. What had I done? And what did I want from it all? I turned over, trying to get comfortable, but sleep didn't come. My mind raced faster than I could control. Thoughts of him, of US, of the life I had built, began to blur together. I felt the weight of the years I had spent trying to hold everything together, to maintain some sense of normalcy, and now it was slipping through my fingers. Somewhere in the night, I drifted off. But it wasn't peaceful. I dreamed of things I couldn't remember upon waking. I only knew that when morning came, I couldn't ignore the changes anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was as it had been. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was already up, casting light through the blinds in sharp streaks. I lay there for a moment, staring at the light. Everything felt too bright, too sharp. Too real. I got up slowly, trying not to disturb my husband, who was still asleep beside me. I made my way to the kitchen, hands moving automatically, preparing the same breakfast we'd had 1,000 times before. But today it felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. I stood there for a moment, staring at the eggs in the frying pan, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. It wasn't from the food, of course. It was from everything inside me that felt out of place. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep lying to myself. The doorbell rang again just as I was finishing breakfast. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't need to check the clock. I knew who it was. I took a deep breath and walked to the door. And when I opened it, there he was. Again. The moment he stepped inside, everything in me froze. But I didn't turn him away. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, waiting for him to speak first. The moment I opened the door, there he stood. For a second, everything else in the world seemed to disappear, the sound of my husband moving about upstairs, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator. All I could hear was the quiet, measured rhythm of my own breath as I looked at him. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his posture, a subtle shift, that told me he was feeling the weight of this moment too. He stepped forward just enough to be inside the threshold, but no further. We didn't exchange pleasantries. We didn't need to. The silence between us spoke louder than any words could. He started, but paused. His voice was low, but clear. I wasn't sure if I should come by today. I didn't know how to answer him. My body felt frozen, as though I had no control over it. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt this vulnerable. This exposed. Maybe you shouldn't have, I said, my voice quieter than I expected. But you're here now. I didn't want to make things harder, he said. His words hung in the air, delicate and carefully chosen. I just needed to know where we stand. Where we stand. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, the weight of his question pressing into me like a physical force. Where did we stand? Where had we ever stood? Was there a place for us to exist outside of the chaos we had started, or was this the beginning of something we couldn't undo? I opened my eyes and looked at him again. The space between us felt thick, charged, but neither of us moved closer. I felt my heart beating louder in my chest, as though it were trying to speak for me, trying to say the things I couldn't. Is this a mistake? I asked quietly, my fingers tightening against the doorframe. It felt like the right question, but the wrong one at the same time. It wasn't just a question about him. It was a question about me. About everything I had built. He exhaled slowly, a long breath that seemed to pull the weight of everything from his chest. His gaze dropped to the floor for just a moment, as if he were trying to gather his thoughts, to find the right answer. I don't think it is, he said finally. But I also don't know what this means. I don't know what we're doing, but I do know that I can't pretend it's nothing. I'm not pretending, I said, a sharpness in my voice that startled even me. I hadn't meant to sound defensive, but it slipped out. I took a step back, letting the door fall further open. Come in. He stepped inside, and for the first time, I realized just how much space he occupied in my life. I wasn't sure how long he'd been in my thoughts, in my mind, but now that he was here, it felt as though the room had suddenly shrunk, as if all the years of my marriage and all the walls I'd built between myself and him had collapsed in an instant. I didn't know what to do next. So, I led him into the living room. I turned to offer him a drink, but my hands felt shaky. I gripped the back of a chair, trying to steady myself, to make sense of the chaos in my head. I had no plan. I wasn't sure if there was even a plan anymore. I'm sorry, he said as he sat down on the couch, his voice softer now. I shouldn't have put this on you. But I don't know how to keep pretending either. I sank into the armchair opposite him, folding my arms across my chest, unsure if it was to protect myself or to hold the pieces of me that felt like they were about to crumble. I wanted to say something. Anything that would explain the whirlwind inside me. But I couldn't find the words. It was as though the more I tried to speak, the more my voice was swallowed by the quiet. The weight of what had happened, of everything I had yet to face, hung over us like a heavy fog. You don't need to apologize, I said after a long pause. I don't even know what I want, but it's not that simple. I know, he replied. I'm not asking for anything more. I just needed you to know that I'm not trying to complicate things for you. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the unspoken. I could feel it pressing in from all sides, but I couldn't bring myself to break it. I wanted to ask him what he expected from me. What we were even doing, but I was afraid of the answer. Because I didn't know if I was ready to hear the truth. Not yet. Not until I had sorted through everything that was spinning inside me. Finally, I spoke again, this time quieter, more tentative. What happens now? He leaned back in the couch, his gaze shifting to the window, the light of the late afternoon casting a soft glow in the room. I don't know. I think we take it one day at a time. I wasn't sure if that was what I wanted to hear. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear anything at all. But there it was, an offer of patience, of understanding, of time. Do you think we can forget about it? I asked, my voice breaking at the edges. Whatever this is? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, He stood up slowly and walked over to the window, his back to me as he looked outside. His posture was tense, like he was wrestling with something deep inside. I waited, watching him carefully, my heart pounding. Finally, he turned back toward me. "No," he said, his voice steady, though there was a hint of something deeper in it. "I don't think we can." The words hit me like a wave. It wasn't what I wanted to hear. It wasn't what I had hoped for. But it was the truth. He stepped closer, his gaze softening as he reached out. "I'm not asking for anything more than this," he said again, but now, there was a quiet desperation in his tone, like he was afraid I would close the door on him. "Just, don't shut me out." "I'm not shutting you out," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know what comes next." He nodded. For a moment, we both stood there, trapped in the silence, not knowing what was supposed to happen now. The world outside continued on, unbothered by the storm we were facing inside the walls of this house. Everything was exactly the same. But nothing would ever be the same again. I turned away first, breaking the tension. "Let's just see where this goes," I said quietly. He didn't argue. He just nodded, and I knew he understood that I wasn't sure of anything. "Not really?" "Not yet." But I knew one thing for sure. There was no going back. The days that followed were strange, like I was walking on a tightrope, always afraid of losing my balance. Each step felt like it might be the one where I'd fall. But I didn't fall, not yet. I moved through the motions of my life, the same life that had seemed so predictable only weeks ago. The family dinner came and went. My husband seemed pleased that our son had come by, and his friend was a welcome presence, but I couldn't shake the weight of what had transpired. I could see his eyes, even when he wasn't looking at me. I could feel his presence in the room. He was never far from my thoughts, his face, his smile, his quiet way of making me feel seen. I had never realized how much I had been starving for that. That night, after the dinner, I tried to act like everything was normal. I did the dishes, put away the leftovers, wiped down the counters. My husband and I talked about plans for the week, but I couldn't focus on anything he was saying. I was somewhere else, my mind still trapped in the space between him and me. As I finished up in the kitchen, I heard a knock at the door. I froze, knowing exactly who it was. My heart raced as I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the door. When I opened it, there he was again, standing on the other side. His presence felt both familiar and foreign, like I had been expecting him even though I had no idea what would come next. "I didn't want to come inside," he said, his voice soft, unsure. But I couldn't leave without saying something. I felt the air in the hallway thicken, charged with a tension I couldn't explain. I didn't know what to say, how to invite him in, or whether I even should. But I stepped aside, just enough for him to enter. He didn't need an invitation. We both knew that. He stood in the living room, looking at the space we had shared earlier. I walked over to the couch, sitting down, feeling the distance between us grow despite the small room. The silence stretched, like it was waiting for something, waiting for me to make a decision. "I didn't expect this," he said finally, breaking the quiet. "I didn't think I'd feel like this. I thought it would be a fleeting thing, but I can't shake it." I looked at him, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to push him away, tell him to leave and forget it all. But another part of me, the part one had kept buried for so long, didn't want him to go. I didn't want to lose this feeling of being seen, of being wanted, even if it was complicated. "I don't know what to do with this," I said quietly, my voice trembling more than I had expected. "I don't know what any of this means." "Neither do I," he admitted, stepping closer. His eyes were searching mine, as if he was trying to read me, to understand what was going on inside my head. "But I can't pretend it's nothing." I don't want it to be nothing, I whispered before I could stop myself. The words hung in the air between us, raw and unfiltered. His gaze softened, and he took a tentative step forward. Then maybe it's not nothing. I felt my pulse quicken as he moved closer, and for a moment everything seemed to fall away, the kitchen, the dinner, the life I had built. All that remained was him and me, in this small, charged space. I could feel my breath coming faster, and I knew that if I didn't stop this now, I might lose something I wasn't sure I wanted to keep. I stood up, suddenly too aware of the distance between us, and walked toward the window, looking out at the night. The streetlights flickered faintly in the distance, casting a soft glow on the sidewalk. I'm married, I said, my voice shaky. I have a life. A family. I can't just throw it all away because of this. I don't want you to, he said softly, stepping up behind me, but not too close. I'm not asking for you to leave anything behind. But I can't pretend I don't feel what I feel. And I know you feel it too. I turned to face him, my heart pounding in my chest. He was so close now that I could feel the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breath. I couldn't deny it anymore, the pull between us was undeniable. The space between us felt too small, too charged with everything we weren't saying. I don't know how to handle this, I whispered, my eyes meeting his. I don't know what to do. You don't have to do anything, he said, his voice low. Not yet. Just be honest with yourself. With me. I wanted to say more, to argue, to push him away, but I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. Instead, I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to find some semblance of control. When I opened my eyes again, he was still there, waiting. His presence, quiet but unyielding, filled the room. I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were before, and I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. But I also knew that if I let this continue, it would change everything. And once everything had changed, there would be no going back. I can't promise anything, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. But I won't pretend it's nothing either. His eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw something like relief in them. He nodded slowly, stepping back, giving me space. That's all I need. The silence between us stretched again, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just heavy. And for once, I didn't feel the need to fill it with words. He stayed for a while longer, but when he left, it was with no promises, no grand declarations. Just an understanding that things had shifted. And that the road ahead, whatever it was, wouldn't be easy. But it would be real. And that, for the first time in a long while, was enough. The following days unfolded like a strange dream, one that hovered between clarity and confusion. I found myself existing in two separate versions of the same life, one visible, ordinary, filled with small routines and the familiar hum of everyday tasks, and another one that lived inside my chest, quiet and pulsing, where the weight of what I felt for him stayed ever present. Every morning I woke up beside my husband, and every night I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I could keep carrying this secret. He hadn't noticed anything yet, or if he had, he didn't speak of it. Perhaps he sensed something but chose not to name it. That was often his way, silence over confrontation, distance over inquiry. It made me both grateful and resentful. Grateful, because his quiet gave me space to breathe. Resentful, because I wished, just once, that he'd really see me. Ask me where I go when I leave the room mentally. Wonder why my eyes no longer search for his. I kept waiting for him to reach across the distance between us, but he didn't. Maybe he thought everything was fine. Maybe he stopped expecting anything new from me a long time ago. I didn't reach for him either. There was a moment midweek when I was folding laundry, and I caught sight of one of his undershirts in my hands. I held it for a long time, just staring. The fabric was familiar. The scent too. But it stirred nothing in me. Not love. Not longing. Just a quiet awareness of time, of all the years we had lived side by side, slowly drifting into parallel solitude. I didn't message him. Not at first. I told myself it was better to create some space. To return to normal. But what did normal even mean anymore? I couldn't stop thinking about his eyes that last night. The way he had looked at me, not with expectation, but with a kind of waiting. Not pressure, but presence. By Friday, I couldn't bear the weight of it anymore. I typed and erased the message at least 6 times before I sent it. Can we meet? Just talk. His reply came a minute later. Yes. Wherever you're comfortable. We agreed on a walk, somewhere open, somewhere safe. I didn't want the privacy of enclosed spaces. I needed air, sky, something to soften the ache inside me. We met at a small trail outside of town, a quiet path lined with trees that hadn't quite turned golden yet but were starting to hint at the change. The leaves shifted in the wind above us, whispering things we didn't yet know how to say. We walked in silence for a while. He didn't push. He just matched my pace, hands in his pockets, his gaze forward. I felt like my heart was being peeled open one layer at a time. It wasn't the walking. It wasn't even his presence. It was me, my guilt, my longing, my confusion, all rising like a tide I couldn't stop. When I finally spoke, my voice felt strange in the open air. I don't know what I'm doing. He didn't answer right away. Just nodded once, as if he understood. As if he was waiting for me to continue. I keep thinking I can carry this like it's something small. Like it's just a feeling that will pass if I don't feed it. But it's not passing. Still, he stayed quiet. Listening. Not interrupting. His patience made something inside me ache even more. I'm not trying to betray anyone, I said, my voice tight. I didn't plan any of this. But I feel like I've been holding my breath for years, and now that I've finally exhaled, I can't go back. He stopped walking then, turned to look at me fully. His eyes searched mine, not with accusation or hope, but with recognition. Like he had been carrying the same weight. I know, he said simply. And I don't want to be something that tears you apart. You're not, I said quickly, too quickly. That's not what this is. Then what is it, he asked, and there was no anger in his voice, just vulnerability. What are we doing? I didn't know how to answer that. I didn't have the words. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to who I was before this began. Before I remembered what it felt like to be wanted, to be seen, to be something more than a background figure in someone else's life. I think I'm trying to feel alive again, I said. And you remind me that I'm still capable of feeling. We stood in silence for a long time, surrounded by the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of distant birds. It should have been peaceful. It wasn't. He reached out, not to touch me, but to gesture toward the path ahead. Let's keep walking. We did. Slowly. The trail curved, dipped into a shaded grove, then opened back out again. As we walked, I told him more than I'd told anyone in years, about the loneliness, the quiet fading of passion, the way I had become a version of myself I barely recognized. He didn't try to fix anything. He didn't offer solutions. He just walked beside me, and in that, I felt less alone than I had in a long time. By the time we returned to the parking lot, the sun was starting to dip lower in the sky. I paused by my car, hands wrapped around the strap of my purse, unsure of how to end the moment. We should be careful, I said softly. This can't become something that hurts everyone else. I know, he said. But it's already something. We just have to be honest about that. There was a pause. One of those delicate, suspended seconds where anything could happen. I felt the pull, subtle but unmistakable. I knew he felt it too. And then, in the quiet between one breath and the next, it happened. We kissed. No words. No build-up. Just a simple, quiet surrender. We didn't linger. We didn't speak after. I stepped into my car, started the engine, and drove away with hands that trembled slightly on the wheel. But inside, something had gone still. Not in a fearful way. Not even in guilt. Just in awareness. This was no longer just a passing current. It was a tide. And it was rising. The following week felt like an unspoken promise hanging between us. Neither of us brought it up again, not the kiss, not the walk. It was like it had been swallowed by the routine of life, hiding behind the pleasantries and everyday duties. I told myself it didn't matter. That it was just a fleeting thing, a blip in the quiet life I had worked so hard to maintain. But every time I saw him, every time he crossed my mind, the feeling would come back. Subtle, persistent, like a string tugging at my chest, pulling me towards something I couldn't define. I told myself I was overthinking it. That it was just a moment of weakness, of wanting something more. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. Yet, there was a part of me that didn't want it to end. A part of me that welcomed the change, that craved the disruption, even if it was dangerous. My husband continued to go about his days, unaware, or perhaps choosing to be, of the growing gap between us. He had no idea what was brewing under the surface, and part of me resented him for that. He had grown so complacent, so used to the way things were that he never questioned the quiet. Never noticed the distance growing, inch by inch, until it had become an insurmountable gap. I didn't know when it had started, this feeling of disconnection. Perhaps it had always been there, buried beneath the surface. But now, it was too wide to ignore. I hadn't gone to yoga again since that day, and I wasn't sure if I ever would. It felt like an open invitation to something I wasn't ready to face, something I wasn't sure I could control. But then, one afternoon, after a long day of pretending everything was fine, I received a message from him. "I can't stop thinking about you," it said. "I can't keep pretending this doesn't matter." The words were simple, but they hit me like a wave. I had known he would say something eventually, but seeing it in text, seeing the rawness of his honesty, made something inside me snap. I sat there, staring at my phone, unsure of what to do. I had been expecting him to move on, to forget about me. But he hadn't. He hadn't walked away, hadn't let it go. "I can't keep pretending either," I replied, before I could think better of it. And just like that, the dam broke. The silence between us shattered. There was no turning back. He replied almost instantly. "Can I see you again? Just to talk?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes. I need to see you." It was a simple invitation, but it carried with it the weight of everything I had been avoiding. I didn't know what would come of it, but I couldn't stop myself from agreeing. The words were already out there, hanging in the air between us. There was no going back. That evening, we met at the same park where we had walked before. The air was cool, the sky painted with streaks of orange and pink as the sun set. It should have felt ordinary. It should have felt safe. But it didn't. We stood in silence at first, just looking at each other. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I wanted him to say. There were too many things unsaid, too many things I didn't know how to voice. He was the first to speak. "I don't want to complicate your life," he said, his voice steady but low. "I just can't pretend that this, whatever this is, doesn't matter." I nodded, my throat tight. I didn't know how to respond. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I didn't understand, but nothing came out. Instead, I took a step closer to him, the space between us shrinking. I don't want to pretend either, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. But I don't know what comes next. He took a deep breath, his eyes searching mine. Neither do I. But I know that this, what we have, is real. I don't want to keep pretending it's nothing. I felt the weight of his words settle between us. It was both terrifying and relieving to hear him say it aloud. The truth that had been sitting in the back of my mind for days, for weeks, was now out in the open. We couldn't ignore it anymore. I don't know what to do with it, I said softly, my voice trembling. I don't know how to make sense of any of this. I don't have answers either, he replied, stepping closer, his hand hovering just inches from mine. But I'm not asking for anything. I just want to be honest about what I feel. I stood there, unable to speak. The air between us was thick with all the things we weren't saying. And then, almost without thinking, I reached out and took his hand. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't anything more than the simple, unspoken truth that hung between us. I'm scared, I admitted, my voice barely audible. I'm scared of what this means. I'm scared too, he said, squeezing my hand gently. But we can't ignore what we feel. We can't pretend this isn't real. I nodded, unsure of what to do next. The weight of it all felt overwhelming, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying it alone. In that moment, the world seemed smaller, quieter, as if everything else had faded away. I don't know what happens now, I whispered, looking up at him. But I can't go back to pretending. Neither of us spoke after that. We just stood there, holding hands, the silence stretching out around us, full of things we both knew but hadn't yet said. I didn't know where this would lead, what we would do next. But in that moment, it felt like the beginning of something that could no longer be ignored. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel something other than fear. Something more complicated, more painful, and more real than I had ever allowed myself to experience. The truth had already changed everything. And now, we had no choice but to face it. The days after that night felt like a blur. I moved through them like a spectator in my own life, watching the familiar rhythm continue, dinner with my husband, phone calls with my son, the quiet moments that once felt comforting but now only reminded me of the distance I had been too afraid to acknowledge. The house felt both empty and crowded at the same time. I couldn't forget the feeling of his hand in mine, the way the world had seemed to shift when we spoke the truth out loud. But the more I tried to make sense of it, the more I realized I was standing at the edge of something far bigger than I could handle. I had known for a long time that I was waiting for something to change. But now that it had, I didn't know what to do with it. He hadn't messaged me again. Not right away. And I told myself that was for the best. After all, what was there to say? We'd made our confessions. We'd both admitted the same things. But the silence that followed felt more deafening than anything else. I wanted him to reach out. I wanted to know that he was thinking about me, that he was just as caught in the web we had created. But I didn't know if I could bear hearing more of the truth. The more I tried to focus on my husband, the more I felt like I was slipping through his fingers. He seemed so intent on going through the motions, on pretending that everything was fine. He didn't ask me anything personal, nothing that would lead us to any uncomfortable truths. His evenings were spent in front of the television, or in his study, buried in work. We had become strangers living under the same roof, sharing space without ever really connecting. And yet, in the quiet moments, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I couldn't stop wondering what it would be like to step into that other life, the one where everything wasn't so controlled, so safe, but also so stifling. It wasn't about love, not in the way I had known it with my husband. It was something else. Something rawer. Something that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. Then, one evening, as I was cleaning the kitchen after dinner, my phone buzzed on the counter. My heart skipped a beat when I saw his name. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to pick it up. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the message. I knew what this was. I knew what he was about to say, or at least, what I hoped he would say. "Can we talk?" the message read. I didn't hesitate. I was already in the car before I realized what I was doing. I didn't think. I just acted. The drive was a blur. My hands were sweaty on the wheel, my mind racing with possibilities. But even as I drove, I knew. I knew this wouldn't end with words. Not with the kind of words we needed to say to make sense of this. It would end with something else. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw him waiting by the door. He didn't move when I parked. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at the ground. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes flicked up to meet mine the moment I stepped out of the car. "I didn't know what to expect," he said as I approached, his voice low. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." I stood there for a moment, just looking at him. The familiar warmth, the familiarity of his presence, flooded over me. I hadn't realized how much I had missed seeing him, how much I had missed the way he made me feel. "Neither do I said quietly, my throat tight. "I don't know what to do with any of this." He stepped closer, his eyes softening. "We don't have to figure it all out. But I can't pretend it's nothing." I nodded slowly. "Neither can I." There was a long silence, one that seemed to stretch forever. I could feel everything in me pulling toward him, but I also knew the cost of that pull. I knew how dangerous it was. I didn't want to hurt anyone, least of all my husband. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the way I felt when I was near him. I couldn't ignore the way the world seemed to shift when we spoke, when we just shared space together. "Can we just be real for a moment?" I said, my voice shaking. "Because I'm tired of pretending." He reached out, his hand brushing against mine, a simple touch, but it felt like everything. Like a promise. "I don't want to make things harder for you. But I don't want to walk away from this either." "I don't know if I can keep pretending either," I whispered. "I'm not the same. I don't know what that means, but I can't pretend that I haven't changed." He nodded. "Neither can I." We stood there for a long moment, just feeling the weight of the decision we had both been avoiding. I didn't know what this would mean. I didn't know if I could ever go back to the life I had before, or if I even wanted to. But I also knew that whatever this was, whatever was between us, it was real. It wasn't something that would just disappear, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. "I'm scared," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "I'm scared of everything that comes after this." He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around me. I didn't resist. I couldn't. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel something, even if it was just for a moment. Even if I didn't know what it would lead to. "I'm scared too," he whispered. "But we'll figure it out. Together." I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what would happen next. But in that moment, it was enough. For once, it was enough just to be honest. Just to admit what had been building between us all this time. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was carrying everything alone. And for that, maybe, I could be grateful.